Welcome to the Punchline! I'm your comic strip critic. And you know, I really do want to talk about webcomics more often. After all, there are a lot of really good webcomics to read. No. There are a number of webcomics that I've wanted to talk about for a long while. Some of these are absolute juggernauts like Penny Arcade, Questionable Content, and XKCD. Others are smaller affairs with passionate fans like Mega Tokyo or CRFH. Some really interesting ones take classic works and turn them into something completely new, like Darths and Droids or 8-Bit Theater. Despite the wide variety of all those different webcomics, though, there's one thing about them that stays the same. They always manage to keep a consistent look, feel, and style over the course of their adventures, even if they do evolve a little bit. And that's what makes today's comic so interesting. While the characters and line work often stay the same, the overall feel and indeed look of the comic can wildly change. And that's what makes Watson so interesting to read. Created by Jim Horwitz in 2010, Watson could pretty easily be mistaken for a newspaper comic, partly because some comics are specifically designed to look like newspaper print, complete with colored dots and coffee mug stains. Before you run off thinking that this is what every comic in the archive looks like, though, it's not. Sometimes Watson looks fairly pastel-y in its colors, or like it was drawn on the back of a school lunch card. I'm not joking about that. Seriously, get your nose up against the screen and look closely. You see that? Good Haven Elementary School. I could throw a screamer up there right now and be a terrible person, but I won't. Because I love you, loyal viewer. Also, if someone out there has a heart condition and sues, I won't have to put on a costume to be Chester A. Bum. Change! You got change! Oh, come on, help a guy out, will you? Come on, change! At least let me hire Bill Watterson to make a money wanted sign. I can use my cardboard box home as a time machine. You know, I'm starting to wonder just how fine the line between homage and imitation is. And in Watson's case, this would be an imitation. And it's a pretty well done imitation of Bill Watterson's style. But it's not an homage. This is an homage. And it's also pretty darn close to Watterson's style, but still keeping Horwitz's style in there as well. Yeah, he's a Calvin and Hobbes fan. Who isn't? So what is Watson about, overall? It's a bit difficult to nail down, actually. The main cast is a group of young children known as the Good Haven Kids and their constant animal companion, the giant dog Watson. Many strips are about the kids exploring the world through their eyes and occasionally asking those questions that parents can't really answer. You know, like, how do soldiers killing each other solve the world's problems? Interestingly, though, there are no parents around to watch them. If I had to compare this to another comic I've read, I'm continually getting a Toonerville Trolley vibe here, which I know is something difficult for many of you to understand, as you've likely only heard of the comic from me and probably haven't read it. It's a good thing, just take my word for it. It's a bit hard to pin down an exact definition of Watson's style, but I think that plays to the strip's advantage. It can happen sometimes where you find a style that you might not necessarily like, but you won't be with that style forever. Eventually you can come back and check in Watson again, and there will be a brand new style for you to try out and maybe even enjoy. It's one of the things that makes the strip so unique. I can't really recall another comic strip doing that. Sometimes the Good Haven Kids will be over-dramatizing the lack of summer when summer school is rapidly approaching. Sometimes other famous artists will be mocked with the best possible puns. Sometimes grammar is burned at the stake. I love this particular one just because of how clever it is. Sometimes there's something as juvenile as a poop joke, and sometimes Watson stops all the hijinks to just hit us with some deeper thoughts. Sometimes, even the quietest moments have meaning. Moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments of regret or uncertainty. These aren't failures or stopping points. These are the stars, the constellations of meaning that guide you through the ocean of your life. All these moments have meaning. You may not see it at first, but in the end, you'll see they're all guiding you to the place you're headed. In the end, all of it will have seemed magical. I have no joke for that. I like it too much. Horwitz also isn't afraid to poke some fun at other cartoonists. In case you need context for this one, he, Terry Levinson, and Stefan Pastis were all nominated for awards at the Rubens, but they all lost the competition. Yes, Levinson and Pastis are both aware of this comic, and yes, they both enjoyed it. By the way, that's a really good copy of Pastis' style on the right. I'd almost believe that Pastis himself wrote it. And he's also mocked Calvin and Hobbes, Family Circus, Garfield. Truly a man after my heart. And even the Mighty Peanuts. Watson is a very, very unique strip, both in the world of newspaper comics and webcomics. I have a sneaking suspicion that Watson's not trying to be laugh-out-loud funny most of the time. I mentioned earlier that it reminds me of Toonerville Trolley, but it might be more accurate to compare it to Zippy the Pinhead, albeit being far more easily accessible. Let's be fair, though. Fort Knox is more easily accessible than Zippy the Pinhead. The final verdict? Well, I'm glad I read Watson, and I plan to keep on reading. It's a comic with a different goal in mind than Retail or The Pajama Diaries or Dick Tracy, and I think it's succeeding. It's a comic that every once in a while makes me stop and think for just a moment, and I really enjoy that moment. So go check it out for yourself. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the creator of Watson, Jim Horwitz, to the Punchline. Jim, thanks for coming on. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, John. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Happy you can be here, too. Watson's a very unique strip. How did you come up with the idea for it?
It's a long story. I'll try to keep it short. Like most cartoonists, I've been drawing my whole life. I doodled as a kid. I drew comic strip in college. And for a while after I graduated, Universal Press was interested in my college strip, and we had about 6 months of discussion, which were very fun and exciting for me. But they passed, and then I sort of felt like it was time to try something different. So a few years later, it's a funny story, I was visiting Hillary Price at her studio in Massachusetts, and she looked at the college strip, and she was nice and said, yeah, I don't think this is going anywhere. What else have you got? And I had nothing in mind, but just sort of fumbling. I was like, oh, I was going to do a comic strip about a dog, you know, and that was the first time I ever uttered that out loud or had a notion of it. And I just said, oh, a comic strip about a dog. And then, you know, we parted ways, and then sort of on the way home, I was like, yeah, a comic strip about a dog. And
nobody's ever done that and been hugely successful with it before, have they?
No. It's funny, when things with Universal Press went sour, I said, if I were to come back with another sort of strip, what works? And they're like, well, you know, The Boy and His Dog, a story about kids, a family. These things are tested and true, and they seem to work. So perhaps that mixed with some spontaneity, it just A met B, and the rest is history.
Just a little bit of being under the gun from Hillary Price there, and you just came up with the idea.
Yeah, I should have said, I don't know. I have no clue, but I just felt compelled to lie. So I said, oh, I'm going to draw a strip about a dog. And
you drew a strip about a dog.
I have a dog named Watson as well, and had him at the time when he was a puppy. I think that's what might have planted the seed. So that started a few years back, and I continued to tinker with it a little bit, and eventually began putting it online in 2010. But it had been around, you know, on my drawing board as early as 2007.
Okay.
So it's been a long time coming, and it continues to change, as all comic strips do.
Sure. That's one of the big things about Watson that I've noticed, that I was talking about during the main review, is Watson's visual style. It keeps the same line work, and it mostly keeps the same sort of feel and mood, but the actual visual style changes so much, from pastel colors to overly bright things for holidays, to sometimes really somber things like the Memories comic, or the ones that I was really interested in when I first saw Watson was when it was specifically designed to look like newspaper, like an actual paper newspaper with yellowing and coffee stains and things like that. What led to that idea where we were changing around the visual style so much?
Is it what led to the newspaper idea, or what led to the just the change in generals, do you think?
I suppose I could say both. Overall, the general style first, and then specifically the newspaper print.
Okay. What I've learned over time as I've continued to work on this strip and other strips is that, you know, my experience of the process of making the strip is just as important to me as the final product. And if I don't enjoy what I'm doing, then I feel like it's going to show through. And, you know, in the end, once you're done with the strip, it's out in the world, and you're kind of finished with it. So it's important, I suppose, as a cartoonist or maybe as an artist, that the process is important to me also. So the look changes as my feelings about making the strip change. And after a while, I suppose, once I've digested, perhaps mentally, a kind of look or a way of doing things, I start to get a little restless and say to myself, well, maybe I'd like to do something different, or where else could it go? And somehow a splinter of an idea falls into the mix, and that starts to grow and germinate. Sometimes the little ideas become big ideas. Sometimes little ideas don't really pan out, and they sort of fall away. So it's an evolution, and because Watson is on the internet, I have that freedom. I'm not worried about upsetting newspapers or upsetting syndicate editors because Watson is doing something new. I think that's one of the great things about the internet, and it's helped Watson to become much more satisfying and of an adventure for me.
It's true.
And yeah,
that's one of the things that I actually, that's one of the reasons I really enjoy webcomics, is that they aren't limited by what a newspaper dictates. You know, you don't have to have 4 panels in a row specifically this big, or, you know, have your Sunday strips be 6 panels that can be rearranged according to a certain editor. So to tell us a little bit about that, because you've also done work for newspaper panel comics too, I believe. You do work for Bizarro, correct?
Yes, I am one of a few collaborators with the great Dan Ferraro, who draws the comic strip Bizarro. Dan and I met a few years ago, and he's become a great friend and a great Watson supporter. And I don't do any line work for Dan, although I do write gags for him occasionally, and that's been enormously fun. And having him as a colleague has also been enormously rewarding and fun for me also.
Okay.
So, yep.
So that's working for Bizarro, but working for yourself in the medium of the internet as opposed to the print comic. You've had a little bit of experience to dip your toes into both worlds. Yeah. So what's the difference like there? How much different is it working for an internet audience as opposed to a print audience?
Well, that's a darn good question. I think the print audience, and I think when you say print audience, I think you mean a newspaper reading audience.
Right.
I think newspaper comic strip readers tend to be a little more conservative, and I think if you look at the general tone of the comics page, it's pretty conservative. It's very PG, and after 100 years of building up the comic strip industry with newspapers as shaky as they are, I don't think anyone is interested in rocking the boat. You're not going to see any R-rated language or NC-17. Blondie isn't going to no tattoos or piercings anytime soon. So I think newspaper tends to be much more conservative, and the internet is a free-for-all. It's a vast ocean of many different sorts of things. There are 22,000 webcomics on the internet.
That many?
That's what I read on the internet.
Okay.
And there are webcomics of every flavor and size and color and shape and content, and it's amazing. I think we're absolutely going through a renaissance now, and I think that's fantastic. I think if comic strips are to survive another 100 years, they need to embrace, people's changing values, and I think that it's a mistake to think that the art of comics belongs to any one business or industry. It's in the hands of readers and the people, and it's going to do what it's going to do. It's the it's the accumulation of all these things mixed together, and I think we can just try to enjoy it and follow it, but it's no one's to corral, and I think that's exciting. And the thing about the newspaper comic strips, and listen, I love those strips, and I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for those, but they still seem to me very much in the past. And when you read a strip in the newspaper, you're not sure if it's 2014 or 1980, and some people might think that's comforting, but I think also it's important to address readers' concerns and sort of the daily humor of real life, and those things need to maybe come a little bit closer for comics in the newspaper to become more relevant and stay with the times.
Which is true, because when I think about it, my two #1 comics of the past years were Retail and Heavenly Nostrils, which are both very modern strips. Retail debuted in 2006. Heavenly Nostrils debuted in 2012. And they're both very modern strips. They talk about smartphones. They include smartphones and more modern updates on modern culture and more modern pop culture references, such as the new My Little Pony show. Not the 1980s one, the new one, Friendship is Magic.
And I have a question for you. Do either of these strips run in newspapers?
Retail does, and Heavenly Novels, I believe, does, but I've also heard it said that it's just a webcomic. It's a little unclear on that note. I actually would like to figure that out at some point, because I know that there's a Heavenly Nostrils book coming out soon.
I wasn't sure, but yeah, I suspect that both of these strips do very well on the internet. I've heard of both of them, and I think that, newspapers help, but the internet is also, not because the internet is necessarily better. I mean, it's great to get readers and artists interacting, but its great strength is that it's more open. It's sort of like a newspaper that's infinitely wide and infinitely tall, and it's a place for many, many strips, which is what makes it great.
You can find an audience for anything. I did a video a little while ago on a stick figure comic based on Dungeons and Dragons. There is not a newspaper in the world that would run that. But on the internet, it gets 600,000 hits a day or something like that.
So is it? Do you think it's a great strip?
I enjoy it very much. I'm a huge fan of it.
Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that it's a great strip, and there's millions of other great strips on the internet too. And I think that it's we have a lot to learn from what's becoming popular on the internet. And I think instead of trying to separate newspaper stuff from web stuff, these things need to come together. And I hope that the business of comics does a better job of trying to embrace what webcomics are telling us and what webcomic readers are telling us about what they want to see. I think that's where things should head a bit.
All right. We've gotten very big talking about comics in general. Let's reel it back in a little bit.
Reel it.
Getting back to Watson, takes a little bit into your creative process. What goes into the creation of a Watson strip?
Oh, my goodness. A lot of drinking. No, I'm just kidding. Wouldn't that be nice? No drinking. I don't think my process is very different from any other sort of print cartoonist or web cartoonist. I keep my antennas up throughout the week or throughout the day. If something funny happens, I try to make a mental note. I draw Watson on different kinds of paper, usually bleed-proof paper for pens, sometimes typing paper, different things of that nature. Then I do a blue pencil, and then I'll go over it with ink, and then I will scan it in, and I will color it in Photoshop. And in the case of the more recent strips with the old newspaper look, with the aged quality, sometimes that process involves different materials and is a little bit more complicated, but it's a proprietary Watson secret, so I'll tell you that it's all hush-hush. But mostly, it's all done by hand. I'm a big advocate and fan of the process of making art, the texture, the feeling of having a craft, and that's something that's very near and dear to my heart. I enjoy being able to make something, and I know that Wacom tablets and the computer things are becoming very popular.
True.
I think I'm probably going to hold on to the physical end of it, the papers and pens, and going to the art store for as long as possible, because it's a ritual that I do enjoy.
Sure. That was actually something I was wondering. I was looking at it, and for a while I thought it was done on a Wacom or a Syntec or something of that nature. And I started looking a little closer, and I said, well, I'm not so sure anymore. It could go either way. I was about ready to flip a coin.
Oh, don't flip a coin. Yeah. I'm very open-minded, and I let the tone and the content of the strip dictate where I go. Sometimes I've been known to use a filter in Photoshop to clean things up if that's what's required. I use different fonts from time to time. I'll use different kinds of pens. Sometimes I'll crumple up newspaper. I'll do all sorts of things. I'm not so glued to one thing that I won't bring in new tools or a new look if I feel like that's what's best for the strip. So
it's not a strict formula, so to speak.
Yeah, not a strict formula. I'm open-minded.
Okay. You mentioned Bizarro earlier and how much you loved it. What are the other comics, either growing up or nowadays, that you really love to read?
Oh, boy, good question. Well, I think as a kid, my, let me think, comic strips. Garfield was the first strip that I really enjoyed. That's sort of when I just started getting into comic strips. And I would go to the bookstore, and they had the great early Garfield books that are sort of longish, and they had different colors, and I would see them on my friends. bookshelves, and it seemed like a fun thing to connect with and to collect as well. So I first started on Garfield and would practice my comics drawing Garfield, and then later Calvin and Hobbes, of course. And, later on as my taste got a little more broad or started thinking about different things, Mutts, Outland in Bloom County, of course, F- by Tony Carrillo, which is recent, but I think very smart. And the list goes on and on. I always have one eye open for that next big thing. But I also get a lot of inspiration from movies and TV and film. And when I draw Watson, sometimes I like to think of it as a film frame and think about the foreground and the midground and draw inspiration from those sources as well. So it's wide open as well.
Which is a good way of looking at it, I think, as a film frame. Because a lot of the comics I really enjoy, Calvin and Hobbes, and in recent days, especially Heavenly Nostrils, if you look at some of the Sunday strips, have a lot going on, not just in the foreground, but the background detail can be just as beautiful and breathtaking in the detail that they put into it. So looking back, you've done Watson for 4 years now. What are the strips that are your favorites, the ones that you're most proud of?
It's a funny thing, and what I'd been considering lately is I may have the temperament of more of maybe a fine artist than a cartoonist, because the strips that look good to me are always more pleasing down the road than the ones that are funnier. And I think from a commercial standpoint, that's not always a smart way to think, because, if the reader doesn't enjoy it or they don't laugh, sometimes the strip is considered less successful. But it's the ones that are more visually entertaining and appealing to me that are the ones I remember the most, in cases when they're not even funny at all. The one that I liked quite a bit from a few years back was, I believe it's called Attack of the 50-Foot Kid, and Fudgy, somehow, the little boy in the strip, has gotten very large, and he's infiltrated a drive-in movie theater, and he's sort of glowing and green, and he sees The Shining on the movie screen and is asking the cars, hey, this is scary, can we change the channel? As if he were at home. And the lighting is very interesting, and there's a lot of green glowing light, and it was super fun to make, and I like that one quite a bit. There are a number of others. I've enjoyed the recent newspaper strips. The Calvin and Hobbes one was a lot of fun, and some of the there's one where Shmoo makes a cameo. The recent newspaper ones have been a lot of fun to create and visually unique. So I think the ones I tend to remember are the ones that I have the most fun creating, and the ones that seem to take the look of the strip in a new direction. But I don't remember the funny ones as much. They don't make a lasting impression on me, and that might just be the way I am.
I can kind of understand this. The ones where you take the risks that always stand out to you more, the risk-reward sort of payoff there.
Yep, I agree. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I believe I saw this on your website. Maybe you could talk about it a little more, but there is some Watson merchandise that's available, correct?
There is. That is correct.
I saw some T-shirts, some coffee mugs, some travel mugs, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe I saw some Watson-branded coffee.
Yes, there is some Watson coffee. There's a great sort of independent coffee manufacturer in the Midwest called Just Coffee Co-op, and they are Watson fans, and we communicated, and they asked how would I feel about having some Watson brand coffee made, and I said, that's amazing, I love coffee, and let's do it, and you can find a link to the Watson coffee on the website, and as far as promoting other products, the thing that I'm most excited to plug to readers is not shirts or mugs, but my availability as a cartoonist to my readers. I enjoy talking to them and answering their questions online. And I know some artists tend to be a little reclusive, and we never see them. But I'm not like that. I enjoy talking to readers and hearing their thoughts about the strip. So if there's any one piece of merchandise that I would like to plug, I would say it's me. Find me on Facebook and let's talk. I'd like to hear what you're up to, what your thoughts on the strip are, and that's the most fun for me, is talking to readers.
Facebook would be the best way to get in touch with you then?
Sure, they can find me on the Watson Facebook page, or if they want to look me up, Jim Horwitz, friend me, and let's talk about Watson and comics and whatever you want.
All right, sounds good. Jim needs friends. We'll give him some. He's lonely.
I enjoy hearing from readers, but I have a few friends as well. Dan
Okay.
Ferraro, he's my friend.
Absolutely, of course, Dan. One last question, I suppose. I'm always going to ask this if I can, is if you had to pick a theme song for Watson, what would that theme song be?
Good question. Well, it's funny you mention it. There actually is a Watson theme song that a friend recorded for me
Really?
a few years back.
Okay.
It's very good, and I think if you could find it, you might enjoy it.
All right, well, I will find it, and I want to thank you very much for coming on the show, Jim. It was great to have you. Jim Horwitz does the comic Watson. Ladies and gentlemen, go check it out at watsonstrip.com. Until next time, I'm your comic strip critic, and I read the funny pages and search the web in search of comics like Watson. See you next time.
Well, there's a dog on my block that somehow learned to talk. Amazing all the neighbors with his stories and his jokes. They'd follow him around just to see what he'd say next. But when he learned that all things die, it left him quite perplexed. Oh Watson, how can it be that you're drinking black coffee and talking with me? Oh Watson, it's a dog's life indeed.